Imagine a town where the darkest secrets have been buried for over 100 years, waiting to be unearthed. And amidst all this, a missing boy whose trace has never been found becomes the key to revealing a truth that could destroy everything. What happened to James? Who is behind this macabre mystery? And most importantly, what is the town of Ashford about to discover about itself? Prepare yourself, because what you are about to see may change everything you think about this town. The truth is closer than you imagine. It was a cold autumn night when the boy disappeared. His footsteps echoed through the dirt streets, far from the city lights, in a small, isolated community in the United States. No one knew exactly when he had gone missing. Some said he had vanished without a trace, while others whispered about what really happened that night. But all were just assumptions. James Miller, known to everyone as the quiet boy, always went unnoticed. His brown hair and shy eyes didn't draw attention. But there was something in his life that no one could see, something that was being carefully hidden, a dark truth that the world wasn't ready to discover. He grew up in a simple home, without luxuries, but with immense love from his mother, Mrs. Miller. His father, a man of few words, worked long hours in the local factories and cared little for his son's life. When James disappeared, most people believed he had simply gotten lost, perhaps due to some error in judgment. But deep down, some knew the truth was more complicated. The mysterious disappearance of the boy had become a common topic in community gatherings. However, no one ever dared to ask too many questions, especially after the local police did everything to quickly bury the case. After all, what could be so big, so serious, that a simple boy would be erased from history without leaving a trace? But it wasn't long before questions arose, and with them, the first murmurs about the true circumstances. James was no ordinary boy. He carried a secret, something that had been kept for over 100 years, something that, if revealed, could destroy entire families. But how could he uncover the truth when everyone around him was trying to hide the past? Every night, James's mother would look out her bedroom window and wonder, where was he? And most importantly, why had he never returned? She felt that something more was at stake, something beyond explanation. The answers were out of reach, but not for long. The city, in its peculiar calm, seemed to hide much more than it appeared. At the center of it all was the lost boy, a pawn in a power game he didn't even understand himself. But who could be responsible? What was so great that it could erase a child's life without leaving a trace? Soon, the truth would begin to emerge, although no one was prepared to face it. Do you think the boy disappeared by accident, or is there something darker behind it? The silence of the small town of Ashford had always been unsettling. Situated in the heart of a mountainous region, the place was surrounded by dense forests and hills that seemed to hide long-forgotten secrets. The streets were lined with simple houses, their windows dusty and doors worn by time. Nothing ever happened there. People came and went, but always staying within the bounds of the known. But in Ashford, secrets were part of everyday life. The Miller family, for example, was always observed with a strange curiosity. There was something about the way Mrs. Miller behaved, a deep shyness, as if she feared something more than mere rumors. Her husband, Samuel Miller, an austere and taciturn man, rarely interacted with the neighbors. He was always absent, working or taking refuge in the basement of the house, where no one dared to enter. For years, the townspeople asked what went on there, but no one ever had the courage to ask the right question. And then there was James. The boy who seemed like a shadow in the community. He rarely spoke, rarely played, but he had an unsettling presence. His distant gaze, as if he were always out of place, gave the impression that he knew more than everyone around him. The children at the local school teased him, calling him the boy of loneliness, but there was something strange about their words, something that could never be completely ignored. James always seemed to be on the fringes of reality, as if he were an observer. He didn't mingle, didn't get involved in the gossip or the simple joys of small-town life. but his mind was sharp and his eyes were attentive. He knew that the answers to the most complicated questions were right there, all around him. The history of his own family was an enigma, and he knew that it involved him in a much deeper way than he had ever imagined. Mrs. Miller always tried to protect her son, but she never revealed what she knew. Her eyes were always veiled with pain, as if life had taken something she could never recover. Samuel, on the other hand, lived his routine in silence, but there was something about him that didn't fit. He was keeping secrets, hiding something from everyone, and especially from James. But the boy knew that his father was involved in something deeper, something that went beyond mere family lies. On a rainy night, shortly before James's disappearance, the boy had a brief conversation with his father in the basement of the house. He saw something, a yellowed, old and incomplete map. The moment he asked about it, Samuel fell into a menacing silence. The tension between the two was palpable, but before he could ask more, something strange happened. Samuel ordered James to go upstairs, saying he was tired. But something in his father's voice didn't sound genuine. Shortly after, the boy disappeared. The town moved on, but the truth was lurking in the shadows. The stories that emerged after James's disappearance weren't just about a lost boy. They were about something older, something more dangerous. And as time passed, the memories began to fade, but something inside Ashford still whispered the truth, a truth that had been buried for generations. Do you think Samuel Miller has any connection to his son's disappearance, or is there something bigger and more dangerous at play? The investigation into James Miller's disappearance was brief. The local police, lacking resources and motivation, limited themselves to a superficial search, quickly closed under the claim that the boy had likely run away from home because of a family argument. There were no concrete leads, and the town continued to live as if the boy had never existed. However, some people, like Mrs. Miller, could never accept this explanation. She knew her son's disappearance was linked to something much darker, but the fear of unearthing a dangerous past prevented her from seeking deeper answers. Meanwhile, the town of Ashford was transforming into a place where the silence was heavier than any unspoken word. People avoided talking about James. Some even pretended the boy had never existed. His memory seemed to dissolve into the mists of time, but deep down, something was beginning to stir in the shadows. Over the years, those who still remembered James began to notice strange things happening in Ashford. Reports began to emerge of mysterious figures appearing on the darkest nights, walking through the empty streets. They said these men, or perhaps shadows, were searching for something, or someone. Whenever they asked the elders about it, the answers were evasive, but the feeling that something was lurking was undeniable. It was then that Ellie, one of the few people who still cared about what had happened to James, decided to investigate. She was a local journalist who had grown up in Ashford, and although the town was small and without many interesting events, something inside her compelled her to seek the truth. She believed that the key to James's disappearance lay in the stories whispered by the elders and the marks left by past events. The first clue she found was an old diary that had belonged to James's mother, Mrs. Miller. The diary was hidden in a secret compartment in the basement of the family home, where Samuel Miller used to spend many hours alone. The contents were strange, almost like a fragmented account, but something about it caught Ellie's attention. The diary spoke of an ancient local cult, a group of powerful men who were somehow linked to the disappearance of children in the city. The connection to the cult seemed undeniable, but Ellie needed more proof to believe the diary's story was true. She continued her research, interviewing former residents and scouring the city archives. The pieces slowly began to fall into place. The cult, which had seemingly been eradicated years before, appeared to be resurfacing, and its roots were deeply intertwined with the families of Ashford. James's presence in the story was becoming clearer, and Ellie was beginning to believe that the boy's disappearance was not an accident, but part of a much larger plan. Meanwhile, Mrs. Miller, unaware of what Ellie was investigating, found herself increasingly immersed in her own memories. She began having nightmares about that rainy night, the last time she saw her son. She remembered a conversation with Samuel, but something in her mind made her hesitate. She knew her husband was hiding something, but the truth seemed beyond her reach. With each passing day, the pain and doubt only intensified. The city was about to be shaken by a revelation that no one was prepared to face. Do you think the cult has any direct connection to James's disappearance, or is there an even more sinister force behind it? As Ellie deepened her investigations into the cult and James's disappearance, other plots began to intertwine with the main story. In Ashford, the echoes of the past weren't limited to just the disappearance of a child. They touched the lives of many other residents. The town, which had lived in an almost insurmountable apathy for so long, was now awakening to a reality that no one wanted to face. One of these plots involved Charles Donovan, an old friend of Samuel Miller. Charles was a discreet man, but his connection to the James case had never been fully clarified. For years, he maintained a neutral stance, avoiding any involvement in discussions about the boy's disappearance. However, Ellie discovered that Charles had been one of the last to see James before his mysterious departure. But what caught Ellie's attention was not the fact that he was merely an observer. By going through his life records, Ellie found a series of suspicious bank transactions, all linked to a number of obscure accounts related to the cult. This led the journalist to question, was Charles an accomplice or just another victim? At the same time, the city was slowly being consumed by a wave of strange events. Dead rats were found in several houses, with strange symbols drawn on the walls. Abandoned cars mysteriously appeared, and an atmosphere of distrust and fear began to spread through Ashford. Families who had previously lived in relative peace began to distance themselves from each other, as if everyone were fearing something they couldn't explain. No one knew for sure what was happening, but as time passed, the feeling that the cult was preparing for something big became increasingly palpable. While Ellie pursued her leads on the cult and its members, Mrs. Miller also found herself forced to confront her own past. She discovered accidentally that her husband Samuel had never been just a simple worker. In his youth, he had been one of the cult's most influential members. The revelation came to her in a moment of despair when she found, in an old box of documents, a series of old photographs, images of Samuel in secret rituals, surrounded by hooded figures. This somehow explained Samuel's coldness and detachment from his family, but it also increased the unanswered questions. What had he done, and why had James been involved? Mrs. Miller, fearing what she would discover, tried to confront Samuel, but he refused to speak. Samuel's words that day were clear. You don't understand what we're trying to avoid. You don't understand what James, has become. The man she loved seemed to grow more distant each day, and with that, a feeling of betrayal overwhelmed her. Ellie, on the other hand, didn't yet know that Samuel had such a deep role in the plot. She was more focused on the cult and Charles Donovan's connections, but the pieces were slowly coming together. What she didn't know was that by digging deeper, she would begin stirring up a hornet's nest that would threaten not only her life, but everyone in Ashford. Alongside Samuel, other members of the community were involved in secrets they would do anything to keep hidden. Tensions rose as Ashford's dark past was unearthed, revealing that the traumas of a generation were still alive and well. Do you think Samuel is trying to protect his family, or has he become part of something much bigger and more dangerous? The truth about James's disappearance was closer to being revealed than anyone imagined. Ellie, determined to get to the bottom of it, followed the trail of clues that now led her directly to the heart of the cult. She had already discovered a lot, but she still didn't have the crucial answers. What really happened to James? Where was he? And what was Samuel Miller's role in all of this? It was then, during a stormy night, that Ellie had an unexpected encounter. A hooded man, his eyes hidden in shadow, appeared at her door. Without saying a word, he handed her a letter before disappearing into the darkness of the night. The letter read, "The truth you seek is buried beneath the old chapel. But be careful, for what you discover may be more dangerous than you imagine." Ellie didn't hesitate. She knew this was the key she needed to uncover what had happened to James. She ran to the abandoned chapel, a place long unused by the townspeople. The structure, crumbling with age, stood isolated in a field outside the town, covered in thick vegetation. The place had been avoided by everyone, especially the older residents, who whispered about the rituals that had taken place there years before. Upon arriving, Ellie immediately searched for any sign that might indicate what the man meant by the letter. Digging in the soil near the altar, she found something buried, an old wooden chest locked with a rusty lock. The chest was covered by a thick layer of earth, but Ellie didn't give up. With hands trembling with nervousness, she opened the chest, revealing a collection of old documents and photos worn by time. What Ellie found left her speechless. Among the documents were detailed records of the cult, including lists of members and their activities. But the most shocking discovery was a photograph. It was yellowed and blurred, but still visible. It was a picture of a young James with other cult members in the background. And in the center of the image was Samuel Miller, smiling sinisterly next to his son. Ellie felt a wave of shock. The revelation was clear. Samuel Miller was not only involved in the cult, but he had been one of its main leaders. Furthermore, James had been forced to participate in rituals he should never have witnessed. The truth was terrible. The boy hadn't disappeared because he wanted to. He had been taken by a far more powerful force, forced to become involved in something no human being should. James's story wasn't just about a lost boy. It was about the sacrifice of a child in the name of something much bigger and darker. The Miller family had become part of a macabre game, a web of power and control, where lives were traded for an illusion of control over life and death. But what scared Ellie the most was what she discovered next. Another document read, "James didn't die. He was chosen. The sacrifice will be made again, soon." At that moment, Ellie realized that James's disappearance was just the tip of the iceberg. The cult was about to perform a new ritual, and she was in the middle of something much bigger and more dangerous than she had imagined. Now that the true connection between Samuel and the cult has been revealed, what do you think will happen to Ellie? Will she be able to stop the cult in time? Ellie knew she had crossed a dangerous line. The revelations about the cult and Samuel Miller's role in it all were more than she could have imagined. But what terrified her most was not only the fact that James had been involved in macabre rituals, but that now she too was being hunted. The cult knew she had found the truth, and it wouldn't be long before they tried to silence her. In the following days, the city of Ashford seemed different. A sense of tension hung in the air. The streets were deserted, and the few residents who still wandered the alleyways seemed to avoid eye contact. Fear was more evident than ever. The cult, which had operated in the shadows for so long, was now becoming bolder. There were rumors of mysterious hooded figures walking through the city, watching from afar. Ellie felt their presence on every corner, with every step she took. Meanwhile, Mrs. Miller, who was finally beginning to understand the true nature of what her husband had done, was devastated. The revelations about the cult and Samuel's participation in macabre rituals consumed her from the inside out. She felt that the life she had built was crumbling, and with it, the image of the husband she loved so much. When Samuel learned that Ellie had discovered the truth, his reaction was immediate. He sought out the journalist and, with frightening coldness, tried to intimidate her. But Ellie, now more determined than ever, refused to be shaken. "You think you're going to silence me, Samuel? You're not the one who runs this city anymore," she told him, with a courage that surprised even herself. Samuel, however, knew the war was far from over. He had powerful allies, men and women willing to do anything to keep the cult hidden. What he didn't know was that Ellie, now immersed in the truth, was willing to risk everything to expose what was happening in Ashford. She had made a choice. No matter the cost, she was going to bring the story to light. On the night Ellie decided to confront Samuel, she armed herself with the only resource she knew could bring down the cult: the truth. She went to the miller's house, determined to face the man who, for so long, had been one of the pillars of this town. Upon arriving, she realized something was wrong. The lights were off, and a feeling of unease enveloped her. Something else was happening. Upon entering the house, Ellie was met with an unsettling silence. The place was empty, but the basement door was ajar. It was there that she knew the final answer might be found. Her heart pounding, she descended the stairs, unsure of what to expect. What she saw in the basement, however, left her speechless. Samuel was there, but he wasn't alone. There were others, all engaged in rituals, and at the center of them an improvised altar. James, or what remained of him, lay on the altar, his eyes empty, and the disconcerting expression of someone no longer the innocent child Ellie had known. He wasn't dead. He was transformed. Something far worse had happened to him. He was now a key, a crucial piece in the ritual that was about to take place. Ellie could no longer contain herself. She screamed, trying to get Samuel's attention, but before she could do anything, the door slammed shut and she was surrounded by the cult members. But at that moment, Ellie knew. What they were doing was something that couldn't be undone. The truth was now in her hands, and she only had one option: escape and tell the world what was happening. What do you think Ellie should do now? Will she manage to escape in time to stop the ritual, or will the cult succeed in its mission? Ellie could barely breathe when the basement door slammed shut behind her. The weight of the situation was clear in her mind. She had just witnessed the beginning of something far bigger and more terrifying than she had imagined, but her mind was racing. She couldn't let everything she had discovered be in vain. The lives of everyone in Ashford were at stake, and she knew there was only one way to stop the cult: to expose them to the world. As the cult prepared to complete the ritual, Ellie wasted no time. She ran through the dark streets, her heart racing, with the sound of hurried footsteps behind her. She knew time was against her. They wouldn't let her get away alive. But she needed to be quick. She needed to find a way to warn the world. Only the truth could stop them now. The secret that Samuel and his allies had hidden for so many years was about to be exposed, and Ellie wouldn't let them silence her. She arrived at the city's old radio station, a forgotten place, but where there was still some chance of transmitting a message. Sweaty and exhausted, Ellie threw herself onto the table, desperately searching for a way to access the transmitter. She knew that if she could reveal the information about the cult to the world, their plan would be destroyed. But what she was about to do was not simple. She was alone, without any support, and her life was in danger. But in her mind, the only option was to act. With trembling hands, Ellie found the transmitter and began typing in the coordinates of the information she had gathered. She knew the cult had influential members who would likely try to block the transmission, but she also knew this was a matter of life or death. She had a chance, and she couldn't waste it. As she began to broadcast, the sound of hurried footsteps grew closer. Samuel and his followers had arrived. The station door burst open, and Ellie looked back, feeling the weight of inevitability. They had found her, but she didn't give up. Her heart racing, Ellie continued typing, her hands now nimble, but her eyes fixed on the men at her door. She knew that if she managed to get the message across, everything she had discovered would be revealed. Samuel, the cult leader, entered the room, his cold eyes fixed on Ellie. He smiled, a triumphant smile. "Do you think you'll succeed?" he asked, his voice thick with venom. Ellie didn't reply. She simply pressed the send button. The message was transmitted. Before she could turn to face Samuel, a sharp pain struck her in the back. She turned quickly and saw one of her followers, armed with a knife, delivering a fatal blow. Blood spilled onto the floor, but Ellie didn't fall. She leaned on the transmitter, trying to keep her eyes open. The fight wasn't over yet. Samuel, visibly irritated, approached and took the knife from the man's hand, putting it away with a frustrated gesture. "You don't understand, Ellie," he said disdainfully. "You should never have started this." Ellie, now dizzy with pain, looked at him with the last vestige of her strength. "You underestimated the power of truth," she said, her words weak but full of conviction. "You can't hide this forever." Before Samuel could react, the distant sound of sirens filled the air, coming from the city streets. The message had reached the public, and the police were finally on their way. Samuel and his followers knew they had lost. The truth was already in motion, and now there was no stopping it. Ellie smiled, even though the pain was overwhelming. She knew she had accomplished her mission. Her struggle, her courage, and her determination had exposed what Ashford had hidden for so long. Samuel and his cult would no longer be a silent shadow in the city. The truth had finally prevailed. What do you think will happen to Samuel and the cult now that the truth has been revealed to the world? Did Ellie manage to defeat them, or are there still more challenges ahead? The town of Ashford would never be the same again. As police sirens echoed through the city, the truth finally began to spread, and the tension among the residents was palpable. Many were in shock, others outraged, but most seemed relieved. For so long the cult had hidden in the shadows, manipulating lives, controlling everything around it. Now its secrets were exposed, and the entire town was bracing for what was to come. Even though Ellie was gravely wounded, she couldn't rest. The battle was far from over. Although the police were on their way, she knew that Samuel and his followers still held power. They were cunning, dangerous, and, most importantly, still on the move. The cult wouldn't be destroyed by a simple broadcast. The ramifications of this would be profound, and undoubtedly there would be more obstacles before the truth could be completely eradicated. While the police gathered downtown to discuss the plan of action, Ellie began to reflect on what was truly at stake. It wasn't just about the cult and its destruction. It was about the struggle for control of the narrative, the memory of the city, and ultimately the lives of the people who had been affected by those who had held power for generations. The city needed a leader, someone who could guide it through the storm. Although Ellie was a journalist, she wasn't prepared to lead an entire city, but her role would be crucial in the events to come. She knew the next phase wouldn't be about escaping danger, but facing it head-on, and she wasn't the only one preparing. Mrs. Miller, who had been away for so long, was now back in the center of the action. She felt guilty, but also determined to repair the damage her husband's inaction had caused. She knew that for Ashford to heal, she would need to confront her past and make peace with the secrets that had been buried for so long. The final confrontation was approaching, but it wouldn't be a direct confrontation with Samuel. It was something deeper, more insidious. The cult wasn't just a group of people, but an ideology, a network of power that spread beyond the city. The pieces Ellie had moved were only the beginning, and what would come next was the true test of courage and strength. As Ellie prepared to face the final challenges, she remembered James, the boy who had been the key to everything. He wasn't just lost, he had been sacrificed, and as she raced against time, she needed to ensure his memory wasn't forgotten. Her mission wasn't just to defeat the cult, but to ensure the truth was never erased again. Samuel and his cult were still seeking power. They weren't going to give up so easily. But Ellie knew that now, more than ever, The truth was her greatest weapon. She was no longer alone. The entire city was beginning to unite. And together, they would face the greatest challenge of their lives. Do you think the city is ready to confront the cult and its secrets, or will there be more challenges ahead before Samuel is finally defeated? The moment Ellie had dreaded had arrived. After days of preparation and uncertainty, Ashford was on the brink of collapse. The cult had tried to rebuild itself in the shadows, but now, with the police on their trail and the truth exposed, the town was in tatters, about to make a decision that would change its destiny forever. Ellie found herself in the center of the town square, where residents had gathered to discuss their next steps. The tension was palpable. The distant sound of sirens and the noise of helicopters flying overhead indicated that security forces were taking to the streets. But the battle wasn't just being fought in the streets. It was being fought in the minds and hearts of the people who were now facing the weight of decades of secrets and lies. The presence of Samuel Miller, now captured and imprisoned, seemed not to shake the cult. His followers continued to act as if nothing had changed. But Ellie knew that the cult was not something that could be defeated simply with arrests and public display. Samuel, though imprisoned, still had powerful allies beyond the borders of Ashford. He had prepared the city for chaos, and the final act of his mission was yet to be executed. Ellie, however, was not willing to wait passively. She knew that the only way to completely defeat the cult was to destroy its central power center. It wouldn't be enough to simply arrest its members or expose them. It was necessary to cut the cult's roots, dismantle its connections, and break its alliances. The true leader of the cult, someone who had remained in the shadows, was now revealed. Charles Donovan, Samuel's old friend. He had been the hidden mastermind, the brains behind the operations. His influence in the city, though subtle, was so profound that few knew its true extent. But Ellie now knew him, and he knew that if he were caught, the entire cult would crumble. In an unexpected twist, Ellie received a message. A code left by Charles, revealing the location of the cult's true center of power. It was an old mansion on the outskirts of town, hidden among the hills. A place where the greatest rituals had been performed, where the cult met in the shadows. Ellie knew she only had one chance. She couldn't trust anyone else. With the support of Mrs. Miller and a few allies from the town, she made her way to the mansion, determined to end the cult's reign of terror. Each step felt heavier than the last. They were being watched, she knew. Every shadow, every breath in the air could be a threat. But Ellie's determination was beyond fear. Upon arriving at the mansion, Ellie and her allies faced resistance. The cult followers were armed and prepared to fight to the end. But with courage and cunning, Ellie managed to enter the place and confront Charles Donovan. He was there, in an ancient hall, surrounded by candles and mysterious symbols. He looked at her with a satisfied smile, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "You finally understand, don't you?" he said, his voice calm, but full of venom. "You thought you could just destroy everything, that you could erase who we are, what we stand for." Ellie wasn't intimidated. She knew this was the last piece of the puzzle. It's not about destroying who you are, Charles. It's about bringing the truth to light, and no one else will be a victim of what you and Samuel did. The confrontation between the two was intense, but it didn't take long for Ellie's allies to begin dismantling the cult, one follower at a time. Charles, seeing his imminent defeat, tried to flee, but was unsuccessful. The police were already on their way, and the mansion soon became the epicenter of an operation that would finally end the cult's tyranny. As the cult members were taken to prison, and the flames of truth spread through the city, Ellie felt the weight of victory. She knew that although the cult had been defeated, the cost of that victory had been high. Ashford would never be the same city, and the truth she had unearthed would mark everyone forever. Now that the cult has been defeated and Charles Donovan imprisoned, what do you think will happen to the city of Ashford? Will healing be swift, or will the scars last a long time? With the cult's downfall and the arrest of its leaders, Ashford began to breathe a sigh of relief for the first time in many decades. The truth, finally revealed, brought with it a mixture of emotions for the town's residents. Some were relieved, others ashamed for having been complicit, directly or indirectly, in something so dark. But there was one thing no one could deny. The town was changing. The shadows that had covered Ashford for so many years were finally dissipating. Ellie, wounded and exhausted, felt relieved, but also overwhelmed by the magnitude of everything that had happened. She had faced her greatest fear, the cult, the truth, the city itself, and had won. However, the price of this victory had been high. She had lost something valuable along the way, a sense of belonging and trust in the people around her. But at the same time, she knew she had done what needed to be done. James, even in his tragedy, had become a symbol of resistance. His sacrifice would not be in vain. As the town began to rise from the ruins left by the cult, Mrs. Miller was also trying to rebuild her life. The pain of losing her son James would never disappear, but she now knew the truth about what happened to him. The knowledge that he had been forced to participate in something so terrible devastated her, but it also freed her from a burden she had carried for years. She, like everyone in Ashford, was beginning to heal the wounds opened by the dark secret that haunted them. The people of Ashford began to come together again, working to rebuild the city. Some were still grieving, others simply terrified by everything they had discovered. But for the first time in a long time, people began to speak. They began to recognize that what had happened was not the fault of a single individual, but of a city that had stood by, that had turned a blind eye while evil infiltrated. The community knew that the healing process would be long, but the truth had freed them from an invisible prison. Now they needed to rebuild not only the city, but also their own identity. Ellie, for her part, decided she wouldn't stop there. Ashford needed a fresh start, and she would be a part of it. She knew the town would never be the same, but she believed that with time it could heal and learn from the past. The future was uncertain, but at least now the people of Ashford had something they hadn't had before: the truth. With the city beginning to heal, what do you think the future holds for the residents of Ashford? Will they be able to overcome the horrors of the past, or will they forever live with the scars left by the cult? Years have passed since the cult was dismantled and Ashford began its recovery. The city slowly rebuilt itself, with each street and each face reflecting the scars of a dark past, but also the hope for a brighter future. The truth about what happened to James was never forgotten, and his sacrifice became a symbol of resistance against the shadows of evil. Ellie, now recognized as the heroine who saved Ashford, continues her journey. But in her heart, the memory of James and the fight for justice will never fade. What do you think Ellie will do with the truth she now carries about Ashford? Will she be able to move on? Or will the past always haunt her? And so ends the story of Ashford. But questions remain. What did you think of Ellie's journey? Did she truly manage to liberate the city, or did the cult leave indelible marks? The truth always prevails. But how far can it take us? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to share this story with those who need to know the dark truth of Ashford. Join the conversation and discover together what the future holds for those who dare to confront the darkest secrets.